And go to that land, come and go to that land, come and go to that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Oh, come and go to that land, come and go to that land, come and go to that land where I'm bound. Good morning, good morning, good morning, all of my virtual friends and family. It is indeed the day the Lord has made. Our task is to rejoice and be glad in it. It is Sunday morning yet again, and God has so allowed us to be able to see the brightness of a brand new day. I ask that you join us as we continue in our Sunday school discussion. For those who are joining with us, we effectively call this topic we're focusing on, be ready. It is there in the lesson text, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 1 through 11, that we begin to understand Paul as he talks to the people of Thessalonica, as he began to share with them that the Lord is coming back. And our task is to be ready. I want to share with you that 51 years after the death of Christ, and there in Corinth, as he begins to talk with them, our golden text simply says this: therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. That's our golden text. Now, why does Paul comes now in this context? He shows with us by way of introduction that people were constantly knowing and recognizing the Lord is coming back. But the question they began to ask Paul is, what shall we be doing? What should believers be doing while we're waiting on Christ to come back? And it is here that Paul begins to explain to them how they should live as believers in expectation of the coming day that the Lord will come. Now, there are 11 verses that we want to look at, but when we think about the first 3 verses, it is here he talks about the coming of divine wrath. 4 through 8, he focuses on preparation for divine wrath. And then 9 through 11, he talks about deliverance from divine wrath. Now, when we begin to look at it, we ask ourselves the question, why is it important for us to know about the coming of the Lord? Well, what it says to you and I is the fact that we as Christians, those who are believers, we have to stay wakeful. That's that word. We have to stay watchful, because we know, Lord, that there are some things that are out there that are going to trip us up, some things out there that can pull us further away from Christ instead of to Christ. But then we also know that those who are sinners, those who are outside of the church, we have to warn them. We got to wake them up and say, look, the wages of sin is dead, but the gift of God is eternal life. We got to wake them up. Tell them, look, you got to come get to know the Lord for yourself. So as we start to frame this bit of text, we discover in verse 1 to 3 the coming of divine wrath. He says, but concerning the times and the season, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you. In other words, here he talks to the Thessalonians. He said to them that you ought to know what the return of Jesus Christ will be. But Paul says to them that there are going to come times and seasons that are regarding the truth of Jesus. And what he ultimately said to you and I, that the idea of the prophetic times they are living in. And therefore, he says to them, you won't be able to discern season from season. And so therefore, he begins to share with them in that time. He began to share with them regarding Jesus and his return. And what Paul would be surprised that some people today consider the return of Jesus an unimportant event. We live as if he's never coming back. We believe we got time to get to church. We got time to get right. We can live, eat, drink, and be merry. You do know some people have the mentality where they don't think, amen, the rules, regulations, the discipline apply to them. But they would rather live their own way. But even the Bible said it's in the eyes of people who think that they are living right, but living a certain way. The Bible says if they're not careful, destruction is where they're heading. And here, perhaps Paul was telling them that in these times and these seasons, he says in the B clause, the Lord is coming back. And so Paul now quotes and says a familiar text from the Old Testament when he said the day of the Lord. That's God's time. That's where man has to realize there's going to come a day, whether we be here or whether we be transformed and transplanted back to heaven. But we do know the Lord is coming back. It is promised. It is stated in his word. But here is why it becomes important to you and I. Because at his return, he's coming to judge the earth, and watch this, and return to glory. Now watch what happens here. It's simply saying to you and I that that day of the Lord is coming. But look what the C clause said. For you yourself know perfectly that the day of the Lord, so come as a thief in the night. You remember when Jesus said that he's coming back, and he's coming back as a thief in the night. No man will know the day nor the hour that the God of the Son of Man shall return. So he tells the Thessalonians, this is what you've always been taught. This is what you should know, that the day is coming. But watch this, when the day comes, there's not going to be an announcement time. They're not going to be slogan, not going to put it on CNN, not going to put it on any kind of Fox News. But when he comes back, he's coming suddenly. He's coming as a thief in the night. And therefore, he says to them that we ought to live in a certain way where we know that if he came back tomorrow, I'd still be ready. If he came back next month, next year, 5, 10 years down the road, I want to be ready when he comes. And so we realize that Paul said, for when you say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them. In other words, he describes not only the day of the Lord coming back as a thief in the night, but he says it is going to be unexpected. That there's going to be a day of tragedy for the unbeliever. That there'll be days where, when we think about all of this political and economic conditions around us, they're going to have a rude awakening. You may think that nobody can touch you. You got all the power. But there's going to come a day that the Word of God says that they shall not escape. And so while it is that we may fret over the wicked, we may be like Asaph and say, and Lord, my foot almost slipped when I saw all this wicked stuff that does. But just like in the days of Asaph, Psalm 72, the Bible says that day is going to come where the wicked is going to be paid for. And therefore, he says, then suddenly coming in a time when many say peace and safety must be distinct from the coming of Jesus. The coming of Jesus described, Matthew 24 and 15, it talks about the fact that when he comes, one aspect will be that he's going to come unexpected. That's an hour that he'll come. Secondly, his coming is business as usual. The world, the other to the world in cataclysm. And then thirdly, one coming is a meeting him in the air. Those, according to 1 Thessalonians 4 and 16, we're going to meet him, this is the saints, in the air. And now he begins to share with them through those first 3 verses that as labor pains upon a pregnant woman. We've heard this before. He says that the woman who is getting ready to deliver, it is that pain that she has until the actual labor occurs. And he compares that same labor pain that the world is going to experience, waiting on him and unexpectedly seeing he's going to come. And so the idea is both of giving birth to a new age and implying an increased intensity and frequency of calamities. Now, we've looked at this because most of us who've studied a little bit and realize that the end times will come, and there are going to be some things that unusual will happen. There'll be, family member against family. There are going to be earthquakes in diverse places. There are going to be things that are going to happen that are calamity, wars, and rumors of war. I need to share this, my brothers and sisters, because every now and then, as you open your eyes, you will see wars are happening everywhere. You will see evidence that the Antichrist is coming back, and all of these things, when people are seeking out power, when people will be manipulated, even the very elect of God will be manipulated. We have seen so much now that yes, we may have to wake up and say, you know what? With all that's going on right now, are we seeing evidence that those days are coming? And again, as we begin to look at it, we realize that verse 1 through 3 talks about the fact that he's coming back. But then we realize that when we make our way to verse 4, we realize that in 4 through 8, he talks about preparation for divine wrath. In other words, he's saying to you and I, not only should we be ready, but look what he says in verse 4, but you, brethren, are not in darkness. Now watch what happens here. Paul first simply told the Thessalonian Christians that they should be who they are. I love that. I love that. In other words, God has made us sons of the light and sons of the day. The times when we were of the night or of the darkness, you do remember those times when you were without Christ. You do remember when you walked in darkness. You do remember when you did not receive the light of the world. He said, you remember those days. But watch what happens here. In the B clause, he said that this day should overtake you as a thief. Paul means that this should not happen for the believer. In other words, we should not operate in darkness. We shouldn't go back to our former state. But what Paul is saying, for the believer who lives according to their nature as a son of light and a son of day, they will be ready, for the return of Jesus Christ. Now, here is our question we have for us. Will you be ready? You keep talking about I come to church when I feel like it, or I don't come at all. Talking about I read my Bible, or sometimes I don't read it all. You got to realize, my brothers and sisters, that God has given us time to get ready. And for those who are Christians, he's respecting much more from you and I, because we know he's coming back, and we ought to be living in anticipation. We ought to be living in a manner that we can tell others and say to others, look, I'm doing my best to be ready when he comes. I got a question for you. What are you doing in anticipation of Christ coming back? What are you doing? Have your life got right? Are you doing certain things that it will constitute the fact that I am in a position where God, when he comes back, I can say, God, I'm ready. But here is the key for us. Because not only does he say that we should be living in anticipation, but Paul is led, watch this, to say to you and I that the coming of Jesus will be a surprise for everybody, because no one knows the day or the hour. But for Christians who know the time, the season, it will not be a complete surprise. Why? Because we got our eyes open. Why? Because we are constantly doing what we can and saying to God, God, we desire, amen, to live in such a way where when things happen, we can say, Lord, we're ready. And that's why he says those who are not in darkness. That's too much about, that's me and you. Those who are not walking in a certain manner. Watch what he said. He said that those should be living as they all are sons of light and sons of day. But if we are in darkness, that's the text. Watch this, y'all. We can be caught up in some of the sin Paul warned us against. Then we are not ready and need to make ourselves ready for the return of Jesus. So as we yet again, we look again, we see that he gives us, in verse 3, he gives us the divine idea of him coming back. Now, as we look at verse 4 and 6 through 8, we realize that he's telling you and I to be awake. Look what he says in verse 6. Therefore, let us not sleep. Well, he gives an interesting concept here, because we do not belong to the night nor darkness. Our spiritual condition, you ought to shout that, my spiritual condition should never be marked by sleep. Sleep constitutes inactivity. Sleep constitutes the fact that we're motionless and we are not active. And therefore, it is here that the writer is saying, you and I, that when we look at sleeping spiritually, that means we're not active, we're not aware, we're just getting along, we're just going along. But he says, watch, be sober. In other words, Paul is saying, you and I, don't sleep when you ought to be working. That word sleep is here used metaphorically to denote the indifference when it comes to spiritual realities. And what he is oftentimes saying, you and I, that there are too many people who are Christian that should be active, they should be in Bible study, they should be singing in choir, they should be in ministry, but what we see, here it is, they're sleeping. And because they're sleeping, they are not aware of things that are going on around them. Because they're sleeping, they're not actively making their ministry count. They're not active, doing all they can to influence and to win people for Christ. Now you ask me, say, preacher, why is that important? Why can't I just sit in the pews and do nothing? Well, I want to share with you, we all will be held accountable one day for the work that we did and we did not do. You do remember Jesus told the story of the man that had 3 men that had the talents, and one went and hid his talent. And what the Bible says is when he came back and he had to give an account of what he did with that talent, he said, I went and buried it because I didn't want anything to happen to it. And look what the master said, you wicked and slothful servant. In other words, he was saying to him, you had a chance to go out and be active. You had a chance to go out and make what you have, the time you have, the talent you have count, and you went and buried it. And this is what Paul is saying, that too often times we're sleeping, we're burying what we should be using for the kingdom work. And therefore he is saying to them, don't sleep. Don't sleep with ignorance. Don't sleep with insensitivity. Don't sleep with no defense. Don't sleep and be inactive. And what he is saying to them, wake up. That's what we ought to tell the people around us. When we don't see them at church, you got to wake up. When we don't see them in Bible study, when we don't see them being active, you got to wake up, because sleeping Christians will never be ready for him to come. And so what he begins to share with us, in fact, not only is he telling them to wake up, but he says, be sober. That word sober doesn't mean humorless, but what it means is a person who is sober. That means that person who is active, that person who has not been drunk by the ways of the world, but they value, they are excited, they are committed to doing the right things. And therefore, he is saying, don't sleep, don't be sober, but then the B clause said, for those who sleep, sleep at night. And those who get drunk, drunk at night. The opposite of spiritual watchfulness is a spiritual sleep. And therefore, he is saying, as Christians, we are of the day and we should be watching and be sober. Now, notice what happens here. Not only does he talk about being watchful and sober, but he also says in the C clause, put on the breastplate of faith, love, and the helmet, the hope of salvation. Now watch what Paul does. He moves from that preparation of being wakeful and being sober, and he says, in order for you to be prepared, you got to put on soldier's armor. In other words, a soldier is a good example of someone who must watch and be sober. In other words, the question becomes, are you equipped for the coming of God? In other words, when you equip, that means you got your armor on. And Paul comes in Ephesians 6 and he tells us exactly why we have spiritual armor, because we're wrestling against principalities, against rulers in high places. Is it the fact that we get frustrated and stressed out because we fail to put our whole armor on? Is it a matter that we turn CNN and all these things on and we pulling out our hair, telling me, I ain't watching that all day for... Well, I got to be honest with you. If you got your full armor on, the Bible said then you will be able to withstand even in the evil days. Because even though you may say that don't concern me, but as a child of God, moving from just being members to disciple, everything concerns us. We're trying to win people to Christ. We're trying to help people to move from being a sinner to a saint. And it's hard to do that if we turn it off the news and we say, don't worry about all of that. You have to, because you got to meet people where they are. And what we began to see, what he's saying to you and I, we got to put the whole armor on. But he said, this armor we put on has to include faith and love. Well, I need to share this with you because when we think about breastplate, we think about a breastplate that covers the vital organs. No soldier would ever go to battle without his breastplate now. No Christian is equipped to live the Christian life without faith and love. And what he is sharing with you and I, when we put on that faith and love, that means when we're out there witnessing, we're witnessing about a God we know. We're witnessing about the fact that I have faith in him. And here it is, I love him. And if I love him, I got to love them. And so he says, those are the elements of preparation we need, faith and love. That's part of that breastplate. But then he says, then we have that hope of salvation. Now notice what happens here. It represented as a helmet because the helmet protects the head, which is just as essential to the breastplate. That hope that he talks about isn't used in the sense of wishful thinking, but in the sense of confident expectation of God's hand in the future. I tell you, without hope, we are miserable and lost individuals. And I've discovered that there are folks that are walking around every day hopeless. And then you wonder why it is that you're hopeless, and yet you never open your Bible. You never come to church. You never pray. And then you keep talking about life has no meaning. Life has no purpose. I don't know what tomorrow holds. Can I tell you, God holds tomorrow in the hollow of his hand. And because God holds tomorrow, he knows the future because he's already been with you in the past. He's with you in the present, but he'll also be with you in your future. But you cannot get that righteous, you cannot get that state of mind if you go away from God. And that's what the writer is saying to you and I, that we got to have that in terms of preparation. Now he comes to the last component as we look at verse 9 through 11. And he says to you and I, watch, first of all, he says the coming of divine wrath. He talks about preparation for divine wrath. And now he talks about deliverance from divine wrath. That ought to shout you right there. Look at verse 9. Look at verse 9. Because when we get to that deliverance part, he said, for God did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we wake or sleep, we should live together with him. Now, notice what happens in the A clause. For God did not appoint us to wrath. Pause right there. Remember, we just talked about hope and salvation. We just talked about the breastplate of love and faith. And now Paul comes and yet again, he said, we are no longer have an appointment to wrath. In other words, take that out of your vocabulary because of who he is, we obtain that salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. And because of that, it is important to understand that Paul means the wrath of God. Not talking about the wrath of man, because here it is, man born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. We got that. We realize rain falls on the just and unjust. Yes, you got to deal with some stuff while you live here. But then Paul says it's not the wrath of man, not the wrath of the world, but it's the wrath of God that you should be concerned about. Because when God comes back, we realize, my brothers and sisters, that he's going to come back and he's going to punish. He's going to come back and judge. And it is important to understand that Paul means the wrath of God. We are saved from the world, the flesh and the devil. But here it is. We are rescued from the wrath of God, the wrath that the whole world going to receive, the wrath that the whole world deserves. But watch this, we are saved from it. And therefore, how do we become saved from it? You realize the first Adam, amen, put us in that state of wrath. But the second Adam, which is Jesus, is the one that paid the penalty. So you and I would not have to receive the wrath of God. Well, how did he do that? He died for us. You saw it there. The idea is that Jesus died in our place. Not simply that Jesus died for us. in the sense of, here it is, he did me a favor. No, that ain't what he's talking about. But he died as a substitute for you. Can I tell you, the Bible said the wages of sin is death. And here it is, anytime we sin, we eligible for death. But watch what he said. But the gift of God, which is Jesus, died on the cross for us, it becomes eternal life. So according to Paul, he died for our salvation. But here's the C clause. When we think about it, Paul says that because of that appointment, it emphasizes God's sovereignty. But obtain is a word that emphasizes human effort. In other words, even though he died for us, we have to still work out our salvation. We still have to put some human effort in. Ooh, that's perhaps the issue we have so oftentimes, where we see a lot of our church pews become empty because people think, well, he died for me. That's all I need to do. But can I tell you, my brothers and sisters, we still have to obtain that salvation. We still have to do our part. And that's why the C clause said, whether we wake or sleep, we should live together with him. In other words, once we obtain salvation through Jesus Christ, we will always live together with him. And that promise he gives us of unity with Jesus cannot be broken. No matter if we live or die, wake or sleep, we always will be with him. What good news that is. But watch what he says. He died for us. And because he died for us, here's the word, Jesus' death is softened by calling it sleep. But our death can be called sleep. His death was death, so that ours would only be sleep. In other words, when people leave here, when they die and translate from here, we're believing they're only sleeping because God, amen, shared with us through it. Now, here's the last verse, guys, and we're on our way out of here. Surge in verse 11, therefore comfort each other, edify one another, just as you are also doing. Look what Paul said. That very word, therefore, is there for a reason. Paul says, take comfort. He says, give comfort. If all Christians have a heart to comfort each other, not to tear down each other, not to be in conflict, not to talk bad about each other, then he's saying this is what we ought to be doing. I've discovered, brothers and sisters, in this culture we're living in now, we made it acceptable to talk about people, lie on people. We made it acceptable to tear down people based on their color, based on their gender, based on their political ideology. We made it acceptable not to comfort. I've heard on a study one time that asked the question. They said that really we ought to take some words out of our vocabulary as Christians. It was an article I read, and one of the very words they said is the word empathy. Now, I kept reading that article because that there are some of us on the conservative side that believe that Jesus should have been showing more sympathy than empathy. Empathy means I walk in the shoes of someone, I can identify with you. And they're saying now that ought not to be our focus, because if we do that, then we've got to identify with the immigrants. We've got to identify with the lost. We got to identify with the poor. Because if we do that, then we will be able and be more prone to help them. And can I tell you, my brothers and sisters, these are the things that we're seeing in this culture now, that people are getting away from the teaching. We've redefined it. Instead of comforting, instead of being there to help each other, instead of trying our best to show Jesus in his empathetic state of mind, we rather change the narrative to fit what we believe from a political ideology, from a conservative standpoint, from the fact that we are believing that Jesus, amen, shouldn't be a suffering servant, but he should be one that exerts power and influence. I see it because what the Bible is saying, we ought to be comforting each other. We ought to be edifying one another. That better word edify means we ought to be building up each other. I can't build you up if I can't empathize with you. I can't build you up if I don't care about you. I can't build you up if I don't love each other, one another. as Christ loved the church. Can I tell you, when we have our first interest in building up other Christians, then God will edify us. The idea, virtual family, is of a church full of active participants. The idea is we move from being spectators to being participators. And so it is clear that Paul addresses them and said, while you're waiting, while you're watching, he said we ought to be doing our best to build up each other. We ought to be doing our best to love each other. We ought to be doing our best to compel each and everybody we know, everybody we touch, to be active and not just spectators. Can I tell you, my brothers and sisters, there are times of they're talking about folk, they ain't gonna never do nothing. Those days are over. But because this work that God is calling us to do, it's gonna take a whole bunch of us being active. And that's why he says in the C clause, just as you are doing, it wasn't that there was no comfort among the Thessalonians, or as if no one was edified, but they had to continue to comfort each other and do it more and more. That's our lesson for the day. I praise God for each one of you. Please, ma'am, please, sir, do your best. Get in somebody's church this fifth Sunday. Amen. I'm sure some pastors, some ministers, some evangelists would love to minister to you this morning. And for those who have a desire, Greater Union is here every Sunday at 11 o'clock. We invite you to come by and join with us each and every time the door of the church swing open. God bless you. May heaven shine.